Husband surprised me W/divorce papers because I ignored his calls on wild night out and came home late. My husband is the type that is always so paranoid about the little things, and I really don't understand why. I honestly feel like he is obsessed with me. My name is Jenny, and I am 30 years old. I am a beautician. I virtually do everything that has to do with beautifying the skin. The name of my husband is Francis. He is 33 years old. Francis is an accountant at a firm. Francis is not financially okay, but we were not starving. The way Francis and I met was very unusual because I don't allow the male gender into a particular session of my beauty parlor. But on this day, he was there pleading for my staff to give him an invite that he wanted to give to his mother and his sisters. From there, we began talking because he was quite bold for a man who had all my security in mind trying to drag him out. I was able to rescue the situation and we exchanged numbers. He was quite an interesting guy when I got to speak with him. Indeed, Francis was not my type on a normal day. Why? Because I had everything I could possibly want, but I needed the companion of a man. The type of guys I dated before were always very comfortable with the little I had been able to get for myself, and so they just lay back and do nothing. But Francis wasn't like that. He was hardworking and a very dedicated human being, and so I loved him for that. It was Long I fell in love with, and we started dating. His family was wonderful to me, and they actually accepted me with open arms, but his father was the most difficult. I couldn't get through to him. A year after dating, Francis had proposed to me in front of his friends and family. Francis had only one best friend, Chris. Chris was like every other guy who was very easygoing and easy to talk to. He put together the event and all, and it was very spectacular. Not quite long we got married. When I was having cold feet, it was Francis that talked me out of it. A few weeks after the wedding, we settled in fine and everything was going smoothly. I was able to take some weeks off work for the wedding and I got back straight to work. I was in my office when my friend Chelsea came, as always, telling me how she was proud of me and so on. She decided she was going to take me out to celebrate married life, and we went out together. Chelsea was the kind of girl that always got your back. Sometimes she can be very wild, and I tend to avoid the crazy side of her most times. I got back into the office and I finished my work for that day and I went home. As a beautician, I have to make sure that my store is running smoothly. I take care of my brand every day. And if it means for me to be checking my employees' work ethics every day, then I must do it well. I pride myself on good working ethics. I got home and I see that Francis is already home. Francis prepared dinner for us and we ate and we slept off. We were still in our honeymoon phase and I felt like it should last forever. Francis was very gentle with me. I felt very loved and pampered. He got me many gifts after the wedding that I felt so overwhelmed. If it was his love language, I definitely loved it. It was already 2 months after our wedding, and Francis decided to invite his friend Chris to an intimate dinner we were having on a Saturday evening. I invited Chelsea also, and I felt like there was something going on between Chris and Chelsea because there was a lot of tension between them. I made up my mind that I was going to speak to Chelsea about it later, and we got to eat. A few minutes later, and conversations were moving around the table. It got to a point whereby he wasn't on the same view as Francis, and he got really defensive. I told him that we can't have the same views on certain issues, and he got very angry because I didn't support what he thought was right. It doesn't make sense to me. Chris was able to dilute the situation, and we continued to eat. After our guests had left, I spoke to Francis about it, and he went on and on about how he was the leader and I was the follower, and that I was to just agree to everything he was saying, whether right or wrong. I told him I wasn't going to be doing that. I believe that matters that we don't agree on mean that we don't agree on it. It shouldn't be me who had to compromise on this. Francis got angry and left, and I felt like I was on my rights, and so I didn't even care. The next day and a few days went by, he kept giving me attitude, and so I went to him and I apologized. He accepted the apology, and we went back to normal. Looking back now, I didn't know why I apologized. I didn't do anything to offend him, but because I wanted us to go back to normal, I decided to put my feelings aside and be the bigger person. I wished I never apologized. Maybe things could have been different. After that apology that day, we went back to normal. Things were going smoothly. Business was moving well. I got to expand my business. Francis got a promotion. I was able to get everything done, and it felt really good. At that point, I was able to speak with Chelsea, and she told me that he had a thing with Chris and they were officially together. I was angry that she didn't tell me from the start, but it was okay. I was just happy that she was happy. Chelsea didn't really like going into relationships because she was really protective of her heart. She normally appears very tough, but deep inside, she is genuinely very soft. I didn't want her to get hurt in any way, and so I invited Chris over and warned him not to hurt my friend, or else he could have himself to blame. A few months later, Chelsea and Chris had already hit it off. They were very much in love. I have never seen my friend that happy. Francis and I went on a couple of dates with them. I tried my best in order for me to avoid talking with Francis whenever we are in front of people because I don't agree on his views, and in order for us not to argue, I avoid conversations with him. Francis was always trying to exalt his dominion over me. I became very tired and I told myself I was going to talk to him about it. But firstly, I told Chelsea about it and she had told me that maybe he was just feeling insecure because I have everything going on for me, and he just wanted to make sure I knew who was still the man of the house. It all made sense to me and I went straight to Francis that day after work and I had the conversation with him. He didn't deny it and everything became very clear to me that Francis was actually who I thought he was, an insecure person. That day we had a huge argument and I made up my mind to not apologize over anything again because he was always playing the victim. Had I known that he was like this, I could have not agreed to marry him because I didn't want to put myself in this mess. A few weeks later, we went on without speaking with each other. We were just sleeping on the same bed and waking up. He was avoiding me and I was also avoiding him. I was very exhausted at this point. My parents were coming into town for a business meeting they had, and I told them that they could stay with him because they had nowhere else to stay. I didn't have the time to discuss it with Francis because their visit was very impromptu. And honestly, I didn't see the need to discuss it with them. They were my parents and they had every right to come to my house. When they arrived, Francis was not home and they still had the perception that we were still very lovey-dovey. I made sure that they settled in well and I proceeded to make food for us to eat. When Francis came back from work, I could see the surprise on his face, but I ignored it. He welcomed my parents and left. When he asked me why my parents were coming and I did not tell him, I told him that it was because he was avoiding me and giving me the silent treatment, and I decided to just do the same. He got mad and decided to throw his usual tantrums. I decided to not answer him and I walked out. I didn't want to have an argument with him when my parents were very close. Francis behaved normal around my parents for the few days they were with us. I knew that my mother suspected something, but I just tried my best and told her it was nothing serious. They left and Francis started his tantrums again. We argued for some time and I knew that it was time for me to take a break from all of this. I didn't want to disturb my friend Chelsea, and so I took a little break for myself and I left for a very quiet town and just relaxed. I switched off my phone and just lived in the moment. Francis was really not who I thought he was. I felt like he put on a front in order for me to fall in love with him and also agree to marry him. I decided to just leave everything behind and take care of myself on this trip. I made reservations for myself, I went to the pub and just made myself feel good. It was as if I had forgotten how it feels to be very carefree and live in the moment. Now I am just here with a lot of problems and it's weighing on me. I spent a few more days there before I left. I got back and I found out from Chris that Francis was on an assignment and he was out of town. Chelsea and I talked about what had been happening in my life recently, and she was quite angry because I didn't come to her when I needed her. I just felt like I didn't want to disturb her. She offered to talk to Chris in order for Chris to speak with Francis, but I told her that there was no need for that. I was going to take care of this myself. And moreover, Chris coming into this then was only going to add fuel to an open fire. I knew what Francis wanted, which was for me to beg him to forgive me for absolutely doing nothing. I wasn't going to do anything, and so everybody was on their own at that point. When I was away, Francis didn't call me for once, and so since he was away now, I refused to call or ask about him because he feels he is the god over me, and I'm going to show him I'm also my own person, and I'm not going to take what he was dishing me laying down. About 3 days later, Francis came back from his trip, and he was a changed person. I was actually very confused. What happened? He apologized to me, and we moved on. It was as if the guy that I married was back to me. We went back to normal. We resumed going out on our couple's date with Chris and Chelsea. We even planned a little vacation together, the four of us. On the trip, I got to know that my friend Chelsea was far gone. She was hopelessly in love. Because something went horribly wrong on that trip, and it was an eye-opener for me and my friend. Chelsea and I decided to pamper ourselves, and so we went to a spa for a whole day. We didn't know that the guys had carried themselves out because we got back to the hotel and we couldn't find them. I called Francis, but it was so loud there and I couldn't hear him. We decided to ask the hotel workers, and they told us that they had gone to a club not far from the hotel. I was already tired from a long day at the spa, and I decided to just rest for the main time, but Chelsea was adamant for us to go and meet up with them. I told her I didn't want to, but she convinced me and we got ready and we left. We got to the club and we couldn't find the guys. I could see Chelsea searching expectantly. I told her to wait, let us get a drink first and we could go look for them. It was indeed a big club and it was fully packed that day because it was a Friday night. After a few drinks and Chelsea and I talked and danced for a while, we decided to go and search for the guys. We searched the whole club, but we couldn't find them. It was a really nice club because it had layers to it with different sessions, and each session had a different vibe. The VIP session was the last one that we didn't check, and so we went towards it. I could see that Chelsea was already very tipsy, but I was praying in my mind for us to see them at the VIP session in order for us to go home. I was already really stressed from all the day's activities. We got to the VIP session and I saw a woman giving Chris a lap dance. I was very shocked to my bones. I tried to block Chelsea's view in order for her not to see her boyfriend getting a lap dance from another guy. But before I could succeed, she saw everything. I tried to pull her away, but she went and started hitting Chris. I dragged her and we left. I was mostly disappointed in Francis because he should have known better not to allow himself or his friend to be in that position. I did my best that night to calm Chelsea down. I could see that she was really broken. I felt so bad for her. When she slept off, I decided to leave her room. I went to my room to talk with Francis, and he kept saying he didn't know when everything had happened. But I didn't believe him. He was the responsible one. Why could he let his friend behave that way? I drove him from my room because I didn't want to see him. When my friend is hurt, I'm also hurt. I went back to Chelsea's room and I saw her with her head in the toilet bowl. I helped her and he told us that he didn't want to have anything to do with Chris again, and she had asked me to park our things that we were leaving. The next day, we were on a flight back home and I tried to stay with Chelsea, but I had to get back to work because I had spent a lot of time away. I went to work and I discovered that we had issues with the owner of my building. I was trying to sort that out when Chris came into my office and began to explain what not. I got so angry that I didn't know when I slapped him across the face. How could he do that to my friend after I warned him not to hurt her? Chris started to explain things to me, how he was drunk and he didn't know what was happening, how he didn't want to hurt Chelsea and so on. I turned him out and I called security to take him out. I had a lot on my plate and I didn't want to add his problems to mine. Moreover, I am not the one he cheated on. He should have gone to Chelsea to apologize to her or even talk to her. He had no business with me. I finished up what I was doing and I left to go and visit Chelsea at home. I got to her place and I could see that everything was taking a toll on her. She looked like she was hit by a bus. I forced her to take a shower and made food for her, but I could see that she was really broken. Chelsea could not hurt a fly even if her life depends on it, and I don't know why that all the men she had ever dated comes to hurt her in a way, and she's as always left to pick up the pieces. I got home and Francis and I got into the conversation of what had really happened. He told me that Chris was actually drunk and so on. I felt pity for him, but what we saw was different. The next day, Chelsea came up with the idea that we should go clubbing. I knew that this was her way of dealing with the pain. I refused, but she convinced me, and I knew that she needed to get out. Since that incident, she hasn't really gone anywhere. After work, I went straight to her place. I didn't remember to tell Francis my whereabouts. I didn't know that. It was going to be a problem. We got ready, and at that moment, I felt like it was like before when we could go clubbing together and get so drunk. I knew it was going to be like before because whenever Chelsea is going through a breakup like this, it is always very brutal. We got to the party and everything was going smoothly. We were making videos, dancing with guys. I could see that Chelsea was really trying to take her mind off things. I just decided within myself to just let loose for just today, and we danced and partied till daybreak. The last thing I remembered was me waking up on a bed with two guys that I didn't know. I couldn't find my phone and I started looking for Chelsea. I saw her passed out in the toilet and I was able to wake her up. I got ready with a very intense headache and I dragged Chelsea out with me. I could see she was still very much drunk and I took her to her house. After I left Chelsea's place, I went to my house and I didn't see Francis at home and I was happy. I put myself together and I went to work. During that day, I got a call from Chelsea and she told me about how she didn't remember anything from last night. I didn't too. I spent the day thinking about it, but nothing was coming to my mind. I got home after work and I saw that Francis was looking so worked up and I asked him why. He told me that he saw everything that I did. I didn't understand. He threw the divorce papers at me and left. He told me that he kept calling me and I didn't pick, and that he had also seen a video of me dancing with different guys. But that is not a basis for a divorce. Francis left the house and I was very speechless. I called Chelsea and told her that I didn't know what happened last night because I just got home and I am being offered divorce papers. I had never been that speechless in my life. Chelsea had asked me to come over to her house in the meantime in order for me to plan my next move. The very next day, I met up with Francis and he explained the basis for the divorce. I was so surprised I didn't know that just a harmless night out could lead to me being served divorce papers. I was starting to recall bits and bits of what happened that night and I found out that I didn't do anything that would warrant my husband divorce me. I didn't cheat on him. It was just a harmless date night. In the process of my divorce, Francis was proving to be very greedy. How can he be asking me to pay him money? I couldn't believe it. Francis, that I had been tolerating his excesses for so long, like why will he do that to me? He kept saying I had cheated on him because I had come home late and I wasn't answering his calls. He had no strong basis for the divorce. It was built on mere speculation. What got to me the most from everything that had happened was that Francis couldn't at least speak to me to know what had happened before throwing the divorce papers at my face. Someone that I married couldn't speak to me. He didn't believe me, but he could comfortably believe a video of me. I went over to the house, I got a few of my things, and I left his house. I cried because I had invested a lot in a marriage that didn't yield anything. How can a man that claimed to love me do this to me, with everything that we had been through together? Our parents tried what they could for them to bring us back together, but Francis's mind was already made up. During those times when my parents were trying to speak with Francis, he disrespected my parents in a way that I didn't like. He was talking to them anyhow. It was in that moment I made up my mind that O was officially done with Francis and the marriage. I spoke to Chelsea, and she had told me to try my possible best to pick up the pieces. It was as if she was giving me the advice I used to give her. Update, hello guys. So at the moment I have moved on with my life. The divorce was concluded after a lot of fight from my own end. I wasn't just going to allow someone to reap the fruit of my labor. It was mine alone. I made sure to continue with my life. I continued to expand my business, and also I have decided to stay and not date anybody for the time being. Like, it's exhausting. As for my friend Chelsea, she finally moved on from Chris. After much explanation from Chris, I discovered that he was really innocent, but with what his best friend did to me, Chelsea decided that she was not going to go back to Chris. I knew it was her own way of standing with me. I also knew it was hurting her. But when she told me she couldn't get that image of a girl dancing on him from her head, I knew that it was more than I thought. I genuinely hope she finds her own person, and I also wish I do too, because men are always taking advantage of us.